The summer sun shimmered over the lake, casting golden ripples across the water. For Mark, that lake was more than just a peaceful retreat, it was his late father's legacy. But on this particular Saturday morning, peace was the last thing he found. Just as he set down his cooler and fishing rod by the dock, a sharp voice sliced through the air. "Excuse me. You can't be here." It was Karen, the head of the HOA, marching toward him in her spotless white sneakers, clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. Mark calmly replied, "Actually, I can. I'm a resident here." But Karen wasn't listening. She had already decided he was trespassing. Within moments, she pulled out her phone and announced loud enough for everyone around to hear. "I'm calling the police. You'll regret this." Neighbors stopped to watch, whispering and pointing, curious about what was unfolding. Mark's jaw tightened. He knew this moment was coming eventually. He had promised himself he would stay calm, no matter how outrageous things got. What Karen didn't know was that Mark had something she couldn't argue with. Something official. Something that would flip the entire situation upside down. But instead of revealing it right away, he let her dig the hole deeper. Because once he showed his proof, it wouldn't just silence her, it would expose the entire HOA's mistake in front of everyone, and this was only the beginning. Karen paced back and forth, phone pressed against her ear. "Yes, officer, there's a man trespassing at our private lake," she said loudly, making sure every bystander could hear. "Yes, I feel threatened." Her words dripped with dramatics, painting Mark as the villain. Mark simply sat down on the bench, cooler at his side, fishing rod balanced across his knees. His calmness infuriated Karen even more. She stomped her foot and snapped, "You're going to regret this when the police arrive. Nobody sneaks past me." Within 10 minutes, a patrol car rolled up, siren briefly flashing before turning off. 2 officers stepped out, scanning the scene. Karen immediately rushed toward them, waving her hands. "That's him. He doesn't belong here. He's breaking HOA rules by being on this dock." The officers turned to Mark, expecting an explanation. But Mark didn't look flustered or defensive. Instead, he leaned back, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment. "Good afternoon, officers," he said calmly. "Would you like to see my proof?" Karen scoffed, folding her arms. "Proof? Please. He doesn't have anything. Just remove him." Mark reached slowly into his bag, pulling out a leather wallet. Inside, tucked neatly in a protective sleeve, was the one thing that would not only clear his name but shift all the power dynamics instantly, and when he held it up for everyone to see, the crowd gasped. Mark's fingers pinched the card between them, holding it high. The words gleamed in the sunlight: "Official Lake Access Pass, Lifetime Membership." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Even one of the officers tilted his head, clearly recognizing what it meant. Karen's confident smirk faltered. That can't be real," she sputtered. She tried to snatch it, but the officer raised a hand, stopping her. "Ma'am, this is a valid pass. He has every right to be here." Mark spoke evenly, but his voice carried weight. This pass was issued directly by the original land trust before the HOA was even formed. "My father secured it decades ago. It overrides your HOA rules entirely." The crowd murmured. Suddenly, Karen's loud accusations felt hollow. Neighbors whispered about how she always pushed people around, but maybe, just maybe, she had finally gone too far. Karen's face flushed red. She wasn't used to being publicly challenged, much less shut down by the very police she had called for backup. But she wasn't ready to give up. "Well, maybe the pass is expired. Maybe it's invalid now," she insisted. The officer shook his head, examining the card. "It's still active. No expiration. This is legitimate." Mark didn't gloat. Instead, he simply looked at Karen with steady eyes. "You should have checked your facts before calling the police." And in that instant, the power shifted. Karen wasn't the enforcer anymore. She was the one on trial. For a moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by the gentle lap of the lake against the dock. Karen's face twisted as she tried to recover her authority. Well, she stammered, even if you can use the dock, the HOA controls everything else. You'll still have to follow our rules. Mark gave a small smile. Actually, that's where you're wrong. He reached into his folder and pulled out a second document. This one was thicker, stamped with a seal. Along with this pass, my family secured a clause in the original agreement. Not only do I have permanent access, but any changes the HOA makes must still leave this path open. You can't block me, ever. The officers exchanged glances. Karen's mouth fell open. She had tried to paint him as a trespasser, but now he was showing he had more rights than anyone else. Whispers spread through the crowd. So he outranks the HOA? One neighbor muttered. No wonder Karen looks nervous, another added. Karen tried to interrupt, her voice shrill now. This is ridiculous. He's lying. But one of the officers turned to her. Ma'am, everything he's shown us checks out. You may want to be careful about making false reports. Her cheeks burned crimson. For the first time, Karen felt the same weight she had often placed on others, public embarrassment. But Mark wasn't done. He knew there was still one more card to play, because his pass wasn't just about access. It was about control. The following week, Mark quietly walked into the HOA's monthly meeting. Normally, Karen dominated the room, barking orders and lecturing neighbors about fees and fines. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Everyone had heard about the lake incident. Karen tried to start strong, slamming her gavel. Let's address last week's confusion, she said, glaring at Mark. But remember, this HOA is in charge. Mark waited for the room to quiet. Then he laid down a thick binder on the table. Actually, he said, his voice calm but unshakable, the HOA doesn't have the final word on the budget. This binder holds the original trust agreement, and as a beneficiary, I oversee where funds can and cannot be allocated. Gasps erupted. Karen froze, her fingers tightening around the gavel. Mark flipped the pages, pointing to the highlighted clauses. Which means, when you raised fees last month to build that private tennis court? That was unauthorized. And when you tried to cut maintenance costs for the lake? That violated this agreement. The neighbors murmured louder now, some nodding in approval. Karen's once iron grip on the HOA was slipping through her fingers. Mark leaned back. I'm not here to fight. I just want fairness. But if you keep targeting me, or anyone else, you'll find it's your own position that's at risk. Karen's lips trembled, but no words came out. For once, she had nothing to stand on. The next days were filled with whispers in the neighborhood. Karen, who once strutted proudly as the queen of the HOA, now avoided eye contact with her neighbors. People had seen her crumble, and more importantly, they had seen Mark stand firm. Mark, however, didn't use his victory to boast. Instead, he spent his mornings at the lake, quietly fishing, waving kindly to those who passed by. His steady calm only made Karen's frantic attempts to save face seem more desperate. At the next HOA gathering, the neighbors did something unexpected. They spoke up, not just for Mark, but against Karen's long history of overreach. You find me for flowers in my yard, one woman said. You tried to ban my dog. Another added, Karen tried to shout them down, but her voice was drowned out by the rising chorus of frustration. And through it all, Mark remained silent, letting the truth surface naturally. Finally, one of the board members cleared his throat. Perhaps it's time we reconsider our leadership. Karen's face paled. Her power was slipping, and she knew it. Mark looked around the room. He hadn't asked for this fight. But now that it had begun, he was ready to see it through. The vote came quickly. For years, Karen had ruled with fear and intimidation, but now the neighbors had a choice. When the ballots were counted, it was undeniable Karen was out. She stood frozen, the gavel trembling in her hand. Mark, calm as ever, didn't gloat. He simply said, "This community deserves fairness." That's all I wanted. The room erupted in quiet applause. Neighbors who had once whispered in fear now smiled openly at Mark. For the first time, the HOA meeting felt less like a courtroom and more like a gathering of equals. Karen stormed out, her reign finally over. And Mark? He walked back to the lake, the sun setting over the water his father had once cherished. He had protected not only his rights, but the spirit of community his family believed in, and as he cast his fishing line into the golden ripples, one thought settled in his mind: peace had returned, not because he had won against Karen, but because he had shown everyone what true leadership looked like, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.